So yeah, doing something a bit different this week. I was tagged to do this list by a channel called Chubb's Reviews, and not only was he one of my first subscribers, but he's also super active in my comment section, so I'm pretty sure he's solely responsible for about 60% of my subscribers. So thanks for watching, man. Hopefully some of these movies interest you. Unfortunately, I'm pretty new to this community, so everyone I would have nominated for this has already either been nominated or done their list. So instead, I'm just going to link their channels in the description and ask you to go check them out. I'm also going to timestamp each film in the description if you want to jump to a specific genre. So with that, let's get started. I batted this one around in my head for a while because I really like action movies, so it was hard for me to pick just one. I thought about John Wick 2, or Mission Impossible Fallout, or the remake of Death Wish with Bruce Willis, and I even went back and looked at some older Chinese movies that I enjoy, like Donnie Yen's Special ID or Kung Fu Killer. But eventually I realized there's a movie that combines everything I love about those films, and it's called The Foreigner. Jackie Chan is a legendary performer, and this movie is just an incredible showcase of his skills. He's not as young as he used to be, but this movie embraces that and actually makes it part of the story by pitting him against much younger combatants and showing that since he can't tank the kind of damage they can anymore, he has to rely on his skills and smarts to stay ahead. The core plot is nothing too special. Essentially, Chan plays a retired soldier living in the UK when his daughter is killed in a bombing, and he takes it on himself to track down whoever's responsible. It's a movie that takes a fairly cliched plot and turns it into something special, essentially making Jackie Chan into the Punisher with a decent amount of Ethan Hunt thrown in for good measure. One thing I like about this film is that it doesn't pretend like you're too stupid to figure out who the main villain is, and instead just puts it out in the open basically from the jump, letting the story unfold by shifting focus back and forth between the two characters preparing either an attack or defense, and then the actual conflict itself. It's just a really fantastic movie with perfect pacing, great action scenes, excellent characters, and incredible fight choreography you always get from Jackie Chan. He's really bringing his A-game in The Foreigner, and I highly recommend it to anyone who's a fan of his, or just of conspiracy thrillers in general. Or you could just watch Predator while occasionally playing a recording of Jackie Chan saying,
"Who would tell me the names of the bombers?"
if you want to get the gist of it. Okay, adventure movies is a tough category for me because I'm not entirely sure where the line is between an action movie and an adventure movie, so I'm going to define it this way. An adventure movie has to take place in multiple locations, preferably remote and far from each other, and an action movie can be that way, but can also be set in just one place. Sort of an all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares kind of deal. In this case, I'm going to have to hand it to a pretty fun little shoot-'em-up called Polar. It's sort of John Wick by the way of Smokin' Aces, and despite technically being based on a comic book, I never read the comic, so I think I'm allowed to put it in this slot. Anyway, Polar stars Mads Mikkelsen, a personal favorite, as Duncan, an assassin for hire who's about to cash out his retirement plan and move on to the quiet life. Unfortunately, he's been very successful at his job, so his retirement plan is going to cost his employer a couple $1 million in payout. Also, unfortunately, there's a stipulation in his contract that says that if he dies before his retirement date, his employer gets to keep the money, and you can see where this is going. What we get is a pretty fun, globe-trotting game of cat and mouse between this guy and a gang of other assassins, where there's no real telling who's the cat and who's the mouse sometimes. There's just a lot to like about this movie, from the stylized but oddly grounded action to the different methods of combat we see Duncan use. Personally, I'm a big fan of characters who plan ahead and outsmart their opponents rather than ones who just go in guns blazing and hope things work themselves out, and this movie strikes that balance really nicely by making Duncan fully capable of improvising and changing tactics on the spot John Wick style, but preferring to have a plan in place long before a fight even begins. Now, I guess I might be cheating a little bit since this is technically an action movie, but it was under the adventure tag, so I'm gonna keep it. All in all, it's a solid film with awesome action sequences, heavy on the gunfights, heavier on the side boob. Next up is animation, and I absolutely adore animated movies, so this one was really hard for me, but I think in this case I have to go with Batman Under the Red Hood. It was either that or Secret of Nim, and I haven't watched that since I was 16, so here we are. The dialogue in this movie is a bit stilted at times, and some of the flashback scenes come off as a little overdone and cheesy, but I still love this movie. Jensen Ackles delivers an awesome performance as Red Hood, and Bruce Greenwood's Batman is one of the best interpretations of the character that I've seen in a long time. Neil Patrick Harris also gives a great performance as Nightwing, despite not getting much screen time, but to me, the real star of the show is John DiMaggio's Joker. Holy shit, is this guy good.
Aw, so you do think about me.
Everything about him just seethes evil, and his gruff, gravelly voice and low laugh really sets him apart from the typical Joker portrayal. I think this is one of the few Jokers I found threatening without actually having to see him do any damage. He just looks, sounds, and carries himself like someone who would kill you as fast as he would look at you. He absolutely nails this part in every way, and it's a shame we never got to see this version of the Joker again. Story-wise, it probably won't blow your mind if you already know the characters, since it's a retread of a fairly popular comic arc, but I like that it takes this into account and adds enough new content to entertain old fans while not alienating newcomers with obscure lore or extensive fan service. It also manages to make Black Mask into a fun and interesting character, which is something I don't think has ever actually been done before. And I guess I just picked a fight with Black Mask fans, but don't worry, I think I can take them both on. This might come as a bit of a shock, but I actually don't watch a lot of comedies. See, I'm the kind of person who feels like my time was wasted if a horror movie has a happy ending, but I think I'm going to have to go with Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. This is a brilliant comedy that also manages to be a decent deconstruction of the slasher film genre. The basic premise is that these two friends buy themselves a little cabin up in the woods that they intend to fix up into a vacation home. Unfortunately, a bunch of college students are off on a camping trip in those same woods and keep dying in freak accidents all over their property.
Kids are coming out here and they're killing themselves all over the woods.
This leads to the campers thinking the two friends are some sort of psycho killers, and the two friends thinking the campers are part of a weird cult. The humor comes almost entirely from everyone involved being confused by everything else going on, and most of the accidents occur entirely because the two cabin owners are just as scared of the campers as the campers are of them.
I'm taking a crap.
You mind if I help?
He's making her dig her own grave.
This is all framed in a hilarious and intentionally stupid backstory that connects one of the campers to the forest the movie takes place in. This is just a fantastic movie. The writing, performances, sound design, and shot composition all mimic a typical Fuck it, I'm keeping that in. A typical slasher film phenomenally, while mercilessly mocking the entire genre as well. I don't actually like slasher films at all, but this is a movie you're going to want to watch over and over again, as long as you have a decent stomach for gore and can laugh at someone getting their head stuck on a wood chipper. Boy, saying it out loud makes it sound so much worse. My favorite comic book movie is a bit lesser known these days. It's called The Losers, and appropriately enough, it was sort of a box office failure, but it does hold a special place in my heart despite its flaws. First of all, just look at this cast. It's even better when you see them next to the original comic book cover. I mean, look at that. That is attention to detail. In my opinion, this is the film that pulled Chris Evans out of rom-coms and into action movies for good, so yes, I do credit this stupid-ass movie for bringing us Captain America. Now, is this a great film? No, not at all, actually. It's got a pretty cliched plot, mostly revolving around a special ops team being framed for a bad op, faking their own deaths, and then trying to track down the guy who framed them. Some of the dialogue is cheesy as hell, and a good chunk of it makes absolutely no sense. But is it a fun film? Hell f***ing yes. This is one of those ridiculous, over-the-top, shut-your-brain-off-and-enjoy movies that also manages to deliver some funny lines and great action scenes, and I just love the hell out of it. There's a certain charm to it that I just can't help but enjoy. I've watched it probably 7 or 8 times by now, and it never gets any less fun. If you're in the mood for an over-the-top conspiracy thriller that also manages to pull off some decent comedy and has an absolutely excellent cast with great on-screen chemistry, you can't do much better than this.
You lying to me? I'll kill you.
Well, actually, I guess you can do better than this, but you know what I mean. Next up is favorite drama, and if you follow my channel or spoken to me about movies for more than 10 seconds at any point in the past 3 years, you already know the answer to this. I don't feel at home in this world anymore. Now, I already did an entire video on this movie, so I'm not going to go on about it too much, but it's just a wonderful movie with a great message and some of the best writing I've seen in a really long time. It takes place over the course of just a few days and follows a depressed nursing assistant and her weird neighbor as they try to track down the man who robbed her home and end up inadvertently getting involved in another robbery. I think one of my favorite things about this is that it manages to bridge 4 or 5 different genres without ever feeling like it's lost its own plot or got sidetracked. Like I said, I already did a full video on it, so if you want to know more about it, feel free to check that out, or just go watch the movie since there's a copyright claim on that video anyway, the fucking bastards. Now, it's going to be hard for me to choose a favorite horror movie just because I love horror movies, so it took a while for me to narrow it down. After some thought, I decided I'm going to have to go with The Descent, largely because it is something most horror movies these days completely forget about: pacing. For those of you who don't know, The Descent focuses on a group of women who take a spelunking trip together on a group vacation. They end up getting lost attempting to explore a cave that's not on the maps, and eventually encounter a race of subterranean humanoids that start picking them off one by one. A huge part of what made this movie work so well for me is that it actually takes a while to see the first monster, and most of the fear comes from the claustrophobia and darkness that comes from being stuck underground. The performances in this film are also all really fantastic. Everyone in it brought their A game, and they do an excellent job of keeping everything grounded and tense. It's even more impressive when you find out that almost all the interior shots are actually a soundstage, and they made the caves out of modular pieces that could be dismantled and reassembled into different sections of the cavern. All in all, a really great movie, but I recommend watching the European cut rather than the American since it has a more impactful ending, and also avoid watching the sequel since it kind of ruins the ending of the original and dampens its impact entirely, like following up your favorite dinner with a dessert made of cardstock, wood glue, and rabbit shit. This one was actually kind of embarrassingly easy to decide on. It's a really cute little movie called Brooklyn. Saoirse Ronan is absolutely fantastic in it, and it's just a genuinely charming film overall. It follows a young woman who moves to the United States from Ireland in order to make a fresh start for herself and earn some money to send to her family. The story largely revolves around her journey to New York, and then the struggle she goes through trying to adapt to the new culture and life she's made there. Eventually, she strikes up a relationship with a boy who sorta sees her as out of his league, given that she's in school for business and he's working as a plumber, and the two start planning for more of a long-term future. Finally, while visiting her home in Ireland, she receives an offer to stay there rather than return to New York, and has to decide between returning to her old life or sticking to the one she's built in America. It's just a really beautiful and relatable little movie, and I think that even if you aren't a fan of the romance genre, there's still enough substance and charm to keep you interested, and if you're a production buff like me, you'll really appreciate the sets and costuming and how well the lighting and shot composition reinforces the atmosphere and emotion of each scene. There's just a lot of attention to detail, and I think this is a movie that's really easy to enjoy, or at the very least to force your girlfriend to watch with you so that you can pretend it wasn't your idea. And this might be weird coming from a guy with a CRT monitor for a face, but I'm not really much of a sci-fi guy, so this one was a little tough for me. I think, despite having not watched it in a couple years, I'm gonna have to go with Event Horizon. It's such a harrowing film, and also manages to be a great sci-fi movie, and it has Lawrence Fishburne in it, so really, what's not to like? This movie's almost 25 years old, but a lot of the visuals still hold up really well, and that's a commendable achievement. The claustrophobic sets and lighting, coupled with the unsettling imagery and slow burn plot, really sells the whole lost in space with nowhere to go vibe that Alien managed to pull off so well. The basic premise is that a deep space exploration vessel that vanished inexplicably has suddenly reappeared, broadcasting a distress signal 7 years after its disappearance, and with the crew nowhere to be found. A search and rescue team is dispatched to investigate, and end up getting more than they bargained for when the ship starts reacting to them like a living thing. The performances are all awesome, and the writing is absolutely brilliant. There's something so appealing to me about blue-collar spacefaring, and I love how a huge portion of this movie is dedicated to the crew just trying to do their jobs and make it to the next payday before things really start to break down around them. Just a really classic film whose influence can be found in nearly every psychological sci-fi horror project to date. It's less scary and more unsettling, like being stared at by a cocker spaniel with human legs. Lastly, my favorite Western, and I batted around a couple of ideas for this one because I had a pretty lengthy list of Westerns that I like, but eventually I settled on the good, the bad, the weird. This is actually a South Korean retelling of Clint Eastwood's classic The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and I think what makes it so great is that it manages to pay homage to the original while still being unique enough to be its own thing. It takes the characters and basic three-way treasure hunting plot of the original, but frames it as more of an action comedy and sets it in 1930s Manchuria rather than the southwestern United States. The creators of this film clearly had a love for classic westerns, and they managed to mimic the attitude and atmosphere of those films perfectly, while also maintaining the frenetic pace, high-style action, and colorful cast that South Korean cinema does so well. If you're a fan of westerns, Korean movies, or just great action comedies, this is definitely for you. Just an all-around great experience that manages to make something serious and gritty, lighthearted, and funny, like a perfectly timed fart in a film score production of Macbeth. So yeah, there's my top 10 films from 10 genres. I've got some honorable mentions back there on the screen that I recommend checking out as well. I hope some of these got your attention, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you want me to cover any of the films I mentioned fully. Also, don't forget to check out the description for some links to some other channels that I enjoy, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.